It's the Montessori Power Hour. I'm David Hargis.
And I'm Aubrey Hargis. And even though it is election day here in the United States, we promise no election talk from us. Instead, we're going to help you answer a much more essential and much more important question for you Montessori parents out there. How many continents are there in the whole world? And after this discussion, we may just decide that it's time for a new continent song. We shall see. Well, but first, we are not talking about the election. Nope.
We are not talking about the election.
Nope.
Now, before we jump into the election, not the election
What?
talk, because we're definitely not talking about the election. I want to make sure everybody out there can hear us. We were having some audio trouble this morning. And if you can hear us, give us a thumbs up in the chat. We know there's a few of you out there. If we're coming through clearly, while we wait for a few seconds there.
Okay, we'll just wait for a few seconds. Give us the thumbs up in the
chat.
chat.
Thumbs up, heart. You could say, yes, unfortunately, we can hear you.
Aww.
All right.
Or just a Y. A Y would work.
Jesse says, I have been able to hear you. If that helps. It does help. Okay.
Perfect.
Well, we are going to go with that.
I think we're fine. Are you okay with us being fine?
I'm okay if you're okay. I tell you what I'm not. Oh, good. We got some more hearts. Thank you there.
Okay, great.
I tell you what I'm not okay with, and that is talking about the election. There will be no election. We don't talk about election.
Okay, well, not talking about the election was 100% not my idea. I'm getting my double negatives crossed. Anyway, we know that there are a lot of you out there who are feeling anxious about the election here in the United States. And emotions are really running high. You can see it in the news everywhere. You can see it all over social media. And so today we've just decided really firmly not to talk about it.
That's right. You know, we're definitely not going to talk about it at all. We're definitely not going to suggest that whatever you do, don't obsessively watch the news or your social media or anything else that might amplify your emotions or bring out more anxiety, because not only is it bad for you, it kind of, your kids feed on that as well. So we're definitely not going to suggest that you avoid those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And we're not going to insist that you use your time to focus on the little things that matter to you right in the here and now. And you know what I'm talking about. What's for dinner?
What's for dinner?
Yes.
What is for dinner?
That is what should be first and foremost in your mind, friends.
You know, I hope what's for dinner is not fish sticks.
Not fish sticks.
We're also not going to suggest that you don't, if you start to feel a little bit, or you have an older child who's sort of curious about it. I remember having these conversations with our little ones.
Yeah.
You not give them a lesson on the word democracy. Demos, meaning people, democracy of the people. And remember that no matter what happens today, the people in a democracy are in charge.
That's right. And that means you.
That means you and all those little ones out there who eventually grow up into big voting people.
Yes, they have the ability to affect positive change in their world, and that is definitely not something that you should mention today.
No.
All right, and
sure,
we're also
sure.
not going to suggest that you go outside for a little sunshine, take a little walk, find some joy in that outside world, maybe tune into nature.
Yeah, or definitely just not go about and enjoy your life in any other way like you would any other Tuesday.
Yes, and finally, we are absolutely not going to recommend that instead of focusing on what's going on here, you might instead focus on what's going on here.
Oh,
Ta-da!
yes. No, I do love this. And this is actually a great segue for those of you who are definitely not paying attention to that first segment. You might want to pay attention to this one, which is, how many continents are there? Now, for those of you who've been longtime followers of it, we've had this channel for like 15 years or something, 10 years.
What?
This channel, this Montessori channel.
Wow.
I know. Now, we haven't done...
Didn't it used to just be my personal channel?
We're not going to say that this was once your personal channel. No, it has. You've been doing this a long time. And our most popular video for years has
Yes.
been Teach Me the Continent song.
And today too, as well, right?
And it well, we're starting to finally see some other videos
Is that right?
pop up, but definitely people love that. And what they love to tell us is that there are not 7 continents.
Yes, people
They love to tell us that. And you know what? I think
true.
that is something really interesting. I mean, how many continents are there? In Montessori, we teach that there are 7, and they have these beautiful colors. And at Child of the Redwoods and throughout Montessori, we use these colors to represent them. And we like to integrate it. And why do we use these different colors to represent the different continents? Anyway.
Well, children are very sensory-seeking creatures, and so with this particular map, we actually want to give them a puzzle to help them visually discriminate between the different continents very easily from one another.
Yeah.
And there are actually a lot of Montessori activities where everything would be all the same color. It would just be the shapes that are different, and that would be a great continent map as well. But in Montessori, we kind of have a habit of assigning colors to things because it then triggers the memory in different situations. So when your child encounters other continent work, it might be color coded to kind of go along with this, and it would help your child to really associate, like, Africa is green, and like this is the Africa work that I'm doing.
Yep. So, for example, when we do sorting and categorizing cards that are about the continents, like native plants or something to the different continents, we'll use the same colors for those continents because it helps trigger that memory. And this is a fun. What ages would use a continent map like this?
Well, we use this map in the primary classroom, so we can introduce it as young as like age 2. Well, I mean, some of these are really tiny pieces, so I would say like when your child is not mouthing anymore, you're not worried about the choke.
We are going to tell you not to do that.
Yes.
Yes.
No. But usually like 2.5 and up is when we start introducing the idea of the world,
Totally.
And children in Montessori learn very, very early that the world actually isn't flat, like as you see on a map. It actually is very close to a sphere. It's not exactly a sphere, although this may be a sphere here. I think it's like an ellipsoid.
Ellipsoid, I think, is what we call it.
Yeah. But we want the children even the very youngest children to know that the Earth is, a beautiful ellipsoid / sphere. I used to call it a sphere all the time, and now
that would also have too many comments.
and now
YouTube.
Scientifically I've learned like it's actually not a perfect sphere. But we do talk about the Earth as a sphere often, even though it's not a perfect sphere. And so we want children to have a really realistic tactile understanding of their world. So
then you would have this kind of map, and this map shows 7 continents. Now, when I was a kid, I learned that there were 7 continents.
Yes.
Now, they weren't the same colors, but that is not universally true. We know, for example, that in the Olympics, you have the 5 rings. Those rings represent 5 continents. Well, where are those other 2 continents? It's because according to the Olympic Committee, the continents are America, Asia, Europe, Africa, and Oceania. However, as we've learned from our YouTube comments and just travels in the world, some people think there are actually 6 continents. They don't distinguish between North and South America. It's just the Americas. And like I said, when I was a kid, I learned that there were 7, but I didn't learn that this was called Oceania. I learned it was called Australia, the whole continent. What exactly is going on?
Well, is it a question for me? So
it's a question for the world. What is going on
for
with
the
this?
world? All right. Well,
who could have so many words?
I think that the interesting thing that we learned from doing our continent song on YouTube that went, viral for its time for our Montessori channel, that is primarily educational, right? Not entertaining specifically, is that people around the world actually categorize the continents differently from each other.
That's right.
And so even though I grew up singing a very specific continent song, singing about Australia, I guess you learned about that in school as well. We always just called it Australia. We didn't really think much about New Zealand.
Or all the other little island nations and so forth.
The first thing actually that popped out, other than Oceania kind of being brought to my attention in our YouTube comments, was actually North and South America, which I had always learned as being completely two separate continents, even though we know that it's connected through Central America.
Yeah, that's
right?
a continuous.
We know that it's like connected in here.
Body of.
But I had always learned them as being two completely separate continents. And in fact, that was so fixed in my head that when someone popped into the comments and said, actually, North and South America are their own continent, and they were very, very passionate in this point of view, and said, in no uncertain terms, you are wrong. You are absolutely wrong. This is a bad song and a bad YouTube channel. There is not just two continents that's like North and South America. There is just America. And to those of us who live in the United States, who are used to calling ourselves Americans, we wouldn't refer to ourselves as Americans, thinking of ourselves as part of these two separate continents. We think of ourselves as just like belonging to inside North America, right?
Well, that's why others will call us U.S. Americans.
Is that right? Yeah. So that was kind of new information to me, even as an adult, to learn that some people, primarily South Americans, don't think of North America as being a completely separate continent. And at that point, after I started doing a lot more research on the continents, I realized that the way we teach about our continents is actually cultural and political. It's not geological.
Well, actually, that is super interesting because the New York Times, if you saw this, recently published a new article specifically about this. Now, it's a fine article. You can go read it. I will say that it opens and says, despite what this catchy little ditty will have you believe, and then it proceeds to link to not your amazing continent song, but some other continent song.
I actually really loved the clickbait. When I read this the other day and told you about it, I was so excited. I was like, we were in bed relaxing, and I was like, oh, the New York Times did a fun article about the continents. We have to talk about this.
Well, anyway, what they found... go ahead, sorry.
Okay. So what I really loved was the title of the article.
Yes.
It says, how many continents are there? You may not like the answers.
That is right. So,
and that, oh my gosh, that resonated with me personally, because I had that experience myself of like not liking the answers when I started doing this research. And when we do our research for our themes and just for the Montessori curriculum in general, it requires us to do a lot of research on geology. And something that we have found through our lower elementary curriculum research is that geology is not a very clear-cut discipline.
Right. So not to step on the lead too much, but that is exactly right. So the article found that in general, geologists have four things that they say define a continent. It is a high elevation related to the ocean floor, a wide range of igneous, metamorphic, and sedentary rocks in silica, a crust thicker than the surrounding oceanic crust, and well-defined limits around a large enough area. And so according to the scientific experts, who are certainly going to be able to tell us how many continents there are, the answer is they don't know. Some say there are 2 continents. There's Antarctica and the rest. Some say there are 3, and some say there are too many to count because, by that definition, New Zealand, as you had mentioned a minute ago, is its own continent, separate from the one that is on Australia. What do you think about this? Does this shake your world? Does this indeed, as the New York Times headline suggests, say, you're not going to like this answer?
Well, are you asking me?
I am asking you.
Okay, well, I do like this answer. I like it a lot. And if you are in our lower elementary courses right now, you will also like this answer a lot because we recently, we just had a big discussion about geological, it's called geomorphology,
right.
which is the changing nature of the crust of the earth. It is constantly changing. And those of us who were kind of, I don't know, I think most of us tend to be a little bit oblivious of the ground underneath us.
Apparently even the geologists are not quite certain what's going on.
Geologists are really interested in this. So, but most of us go through, those of us who are not geologists, go through our lives and maybe we just like live in the houses that we're living in or walk in our neighborhood and just enjoy the natural features that we can see. But when we start digging underneath our own homes and our own neighborhoods and really looking at the way the land formed that's all around us is actually really, really fascinating, can be eye-opening because we can, as we kind of explore and dig down into like the natural landforms around us, we realize that there are all these geological processes that have been happening on, just literally, where in the place where our feet are, and maybe some of it had to do with during the time of the dinosaurs, and maybe some of it was like millions and millions of years earlier than that, right? So that's all fascinating to know.
Sure.
What's under our feet. But we tend to be thinking about the land that we're living on as just kind of essentially just being on whatever continent it's supposed to be on.
And that continent is named whatever we learn.
Right. Whatever we learned, it was that continent. But when you start doing more morphological research like we do in our lower elementary curriculum, and we have our children specifically studying these processes, we start learning some fascinating things, not just Pangea, which is really amazing, but there's actually some older forms of, continent formations that happened even before
these other
Pangea.
supercontinents.
Yeah, I think at one time, a very classic Montessori activity for children to do would be to make a continent map. So I remember one time when our oldest was interested in the first grade lesson and the second grade lesson. I guess it would be kind of in between those two, right? The formation of the earth and then the evolution of life on earth. He discovered Rodinia. Do you remember that?
No? Oh, yes. That's right.
And so he actually made a Montessori map of Rodinia in a very classic way that we teach, like with watercolors and Sharpies, how all of these land masses had come together. And it was very much like Pangea, but I'm pretty sure it's earlier than that.
Yeah, I remember he really got interested in all the variations of the supercontinent.
Yeah, and there are many. There's not just Pangea. There's like many different times on Earth where the landforms on Earth kind of came together in interesting ways and then split apart again.
Yeah.
So if we look even at just this very simple continent map right here, we can identify some of the ways that our Earth was connected. Well, we can just look at this, and even little children will hold the continents together, and they'll see, hey, like these actually could kind of fit together there. Isn't that interesting, Or, they might notice, like, on this map, here we have Asia way over here and North America over here, but they might be wondering, like, what's going on with this Arctic Circle up here, and how did people get from Africa all the way over into North America? Where did those indigenous people come from? How did they get there in the first place, especially if there's just water all around, Did people develop, boats, sail by boats? The answer is no, they walked. How could they walk? So these discoveries about how the continents were connected together actually can lead to really great Montessori lessons that you have with your child.
That's right.
So we actually also, children will notice pretty much right away, they'll say, okay, so this is Europe, and this is Asia, but they are not separated from each other, right? They're like connected together.
That's right.
Why are there two continents in and here we have Asia and here we have Europe. Like, why isn't it just one continent? It seems like it's just one continent.
That's right.
So why isn't it? And the answer, maybe not surprisingly, is because we said so. There's no geological reason.
Which is what the new
research
research found, right? Like, as the research continues to dig in, and even by their own changing and improving definitions of what is a continent or not a continent, like the more they dig, the more they realize that there's more to know.
I remember when we were I can't remember which theme was it that we started studying. Oh, we did one on mountains.
That's climb.
Climb. We did a theme called Climb.
That's in January of this year. So if you are in the community and you are interested in this, you can go back to the January 2024 edition.
Yes. So when our members were discussing all of the mountains of the world, one of our members who happens to, I think, live in Appalachia in the United States was like, oh yes, and we could study how the Appalachian Mountains, are actually part of the Scottish Highlands up here in Europe. Like, it's the same mountain range. How could it be the same mountain range? There's so much mystery and intrigue that comes out of these kind of discussions. So I had a really enjoyable little internet rabbit trail.
Which then leads also, and now I'm curious too, because
which was so fun.
The Scottish Highland, this Mid-Atlantic was there's a lots of Scots-Irish in the Mid-Atlantic, so it's in the Appalachian region that connects back to the Scottish Highlands, also many of the peoples there.
I know.
So this is like you would call this rabbit hole.
It felt like home, right? When they started coming over to that area, I think.
And geologically, it is connected.
And geologically, it makes sense.
Yeah. So it's what's interesting, and this goes to kind of what is the answer to how many continents are there? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Right.
Well, the answer is. The answer is actually much more fascinating, right? The continents on our Earth are changing just as much as like the very tippy surface of the Earth that you can see outside.
Right.
When you look out into your yard, you see the dust, or maybe our back fence just broke, and so we're at the bottom of a hill, and so like the land is about to shift this way, or it's always pushing and trying to shift this way, and that's kind of on this little micro level. But on that macro level of the Earth's surface, like, it's constantly moving. The continents are constantly moving around.
Right. Very, very, very slowly.
And so politically, poor New Zealand, just felt so left out when we were like, there's just one continent down there, and it's Australia.
And we're going to call it Australia. Yeah.
So we got to call it Oceania and include all the little islands plus New Zealand. Poor New Zealand, like, couldn't be left out. That's what I was.
What is science finding now?
But what is science finding? Science is finding New Zealand is actually on its own continent.
Zealandia or something.
Zealandia. Yeah. Except that most of it is underwater. Well, how could a continent be underwater? Like, if the definition of a continent is that it is above water like we usually think it is, then how could the continent of New Zealand just be like this teeny tiny?
Because, as the New York Times article indicates, it's actually not that it's sticking up. It is a high elevation relative to the ocean floor. So it is, and a wide range of types of rock with silica and a thicker crust. So it isn't just like it's the stuff that's sticking out of the water and you're walking around on.
Yeah.
It's all these other factors. But to go back to what I was thinking, like the answer, I might answer it as yes. Like, how many are there? There are 5, there are 7, there are an unknown amount, because humans will want to define the map in lots of different ways for lots of different purposes. Yeah. Is it wrong to teach your child the classic 7-continent Montessori method? Not at all. No. There's value in helping them understand the world. But in the Montessori method, because of the way that with the spiraling curriculum, you're going to build on that over time through the core curriculum to deepen and start to understand well, what is the distinction and how are the peoples on there? And what about under the surface? And why would they have once thought it was separate, but now we think that maybe it's the same? And will we ever change it? And what happens in 10 million years? Will they have smooshed together? Those are the kinds of questions, especially as your child gets older, will also be sparked by this question of how many continents are there? So I guess the answer that I would give to the New York Times when they said you might not like the answer is that they're wrong.
Yeah,
I do like the answer.
answer.
I like the answer because it means it's more interesting.
It is actually genuinely more interesting. And for our little ones, those of you with primary children, these are not things that you have to keep from your child. You can absolutely talk about the mystery of the way the continents evolved. You can also be really upfront with them. This is the way we, or people, and humans have, for right now, some humans have decided to kind of categorize the world. Here's a continent map. Some people, you could even say, like, some people call this one continent. North and South America to them is just America. And on our map, we use orange and pink to distinguish it into North and South America, and you can also talk about how Asia and Europe could be considered one continent. I think we call it Eurasia. But on our map, we separate it, just to let us know that some people make the distinction, so it's actually not that hard to talk about with kids. It's great because it opens them up for a discussion and allows them to ask a lot more questions. And you never have to have the answers to all of their questions. In fact, the asking of the questions is the more important part.
Yeah, and the question I have right now is, could we call it Asia instead of Eurasia?
I guess we could.
Asia.
It doesn't sound as nice to me, but we could. I guess we could.
This is the important questions of the world.
Do we have any comments there?
We don't.
Because I can't read them. No, not today.
No comments today. Well, the last thing I would add on this as we conclude is we're definitely not talking about politics today. But I would say that the fact that all of these continents probably are all just connected at the end of the day, definitely does not teach us a lesson about how humankind really is, and that is we're all connected and together.
Absolutely.
So let's not let that be the lesson of the day, right? Like, we're trying to go back to our earlier segment about not talking about politics.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Your double negatives are messing with my head.
My double negatives are definitely not the problem.
I'm like, but that's the whole point of Montessori.
Not.
We're citizens of the earth.
No, of course.
Yeah, that's what we teach.
All right. Well, I think... Go ahead. Sorry.
So I was going to encourage all of our members out there to go and get out your continent map if you have one. If you don't, get out your globe. Hopefully you have some kind of way to share the earth with your child. And maybe emphasize that, continents are really cool. They shift around and you don't have to put a number on exactly how many there are. We are really all one.
And if you would love to know more about how to bring those classic Montessori lessons to life, we invite you to join us at Child of the Redwoods. If you're not already a member, you can head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com, to get all that information. We even have a 7-day free trial. This month's theme is Stellar, so if you sign up for that free trial, you'll get a copy of Stellar, which includes the first great story, which is a perfect lead into where all these continents came from, because it's about how the land formed on the earth.
That's right.
And so we would love to see you there. If you have any questions, you can email us at hello@childoftheredwoods.com, and we'll be happy to answer those as well.
All right. Thanks for joining us, friends, today.
We'll see you next week. Bye.